In this video, I am going to be going over the proper application for glaze and specifically how to brush glaze on, because there are other methods such as pouring and dipping glaze that you could also do, but for our situation, we're going to be brushing glaze on. So one of the first things that you'll need to do is you'll need to take the item that you're going to be glazing and you need to rinse it off to remove the dust that has settled from the bisque firing and potentially any other dust that might have accumulated if it's been sitting for a while. So I just ran this underneath a running faucet, and then the other items, having a banding wheel, a paper towel to keep the banding wheel clean from any glaze drips, and you're sitting your piece that you're going to be glazing on top of that. Another item of importance is that you want to make sure your hands are also cleaned. You have natural oils on your fingertips and your hands that could act as a resist, meaning the glaze will not adhere properly during the glaze firing. And you're definitely not putting lotion on your hands before or any time, around the same time as you would be glazing, because that would cause a glazing error to occur. Finally, you'll need to get a brush. I like to pick the largest brush as possible so that my brush strokes that I'm going to be applying on here are as smooth as possible. So I would recommend, with something this size, get one of these flat brushes. This is about 3/4 of an inch wide. In the classroom, you'll see them in these different containers, these blue containers. The fan brushes are also really nice. For this, though, I'm not going to be using the fan brush because I have a lot of little nooks and crannies that I'm going to need to get into, and this will work a little bit nicer because the bristles are a little more stiff. This would be good for something like this bowl that has a larger flat surface area. So brushing that back and forth would be ideal. Again, to prevent streaks. So I've got my brush, and then pick your glaze or your combination of glazes. In the classroom, a good starting point if you want to experiment with layering different glazes is this little laminated packet. So you can see, for instance, if we're looking at seafoam green and autumn leaf, you would do 2 coats of autumn leaf, 1 of seafoam green, and then on the right, that is the result that you would get. Now, these are all just specific to Amico glazes. We do have a few other brands, and this is the Opalescence series, which is just a different type of overall appearance that you'll get. But you can look through these and get an idea. We don't have all of these glazes, but we do have most of them. All right, so I'm going to be working with this particular glaze. It's called Amber. It is an Amico LG series. You will also want to take note of the tile sample. That's going to give you the best estimation of what this will look like once it is fired. What it looks like in the container will not be the same as what it looks like once it's fired. A chemical reaction occurs where the elements that are used for each particular unique set of ingredients for every glaze, those will create different effects. So a lot of glazes in our classroom do look similar to how this glaze looks here. So I'm going to show that to you guys. Actually, let's first shake this before I open it. You will want to give this a good shake because sediment will settle to the bottom and then more of the liquid will be at the top. So you want to make sure this is as evenly mixed as possible. All right, so I have my glaze ready to go. I have my brush. I have shaken this up, and You can see the color of the glaze. Again, this is what it will look like. You'll need to apply 3 coats to get these results. So like I said, you could layer this particular color with 1 or 2 other colors because you have a total of 3. But for this example, I'm just going to be working with the amber colored glaze. And let's get started. I'm going to be brushing this on, so I want this to be fully loaded, but I'm not dipping this all the way to the ferrule, the metal part. That makes cleaning these a lot harder. We want to care for these brushes. They are fairly expensive, so make sure we're being respectful of classroom materials. Now, it's preference whether you want to start on the inside or the outside. I'm actually going to flip this upside down and start on the outside because I want to make sure one of the very first things that you consider when you're glazing is that you do not want to have glaze on the bottom. Glaze will stick to whatever surface it's sitting on when it is being fired in the kiln for the glaze firing. And here's an example of what I mean by that. This is a kiln support to support the shelves. There's multiple shelves in the kiln. You can see that this item, this piece of bisque was glazed and fused to this support. There's no way of getting this off. You can see how it was removed by breaking, splitting this in half. So our kiln shelf is this, right? And it is coated in a kiln wash, but you'll end up, if some glaze is on the bottom and I miss it when I'm loading the kiln, you'll end up removing some of that glaze wash and it'll permanently be stuck on the bottom of your piece. So we're gonna avoid that and actually leave about 1/10 to 1/4 of an inch extra space just for a little bit of extra insurance that if it does drip and run, because some glazes run more than others, then we have something to catch that. All right, so I'm going to be glazing and brushing on the glazes. So notice I flipped my brush. I'm trying to catch any other spots where I have some glaze on here. Then I am reloading and I'm going to slightly overlap my previous coat and then continue on. I'm going to go back and kind of spread that part out, feather that out a bit, and then continue glazing. The key with this, again, slightly overlap, I'll come back, is that you don't want to work too slow that the glaze dries on you. Because at that point, so I'm feathering that out, the little extra, really delicate, just using the tips of the bristle here. At that point, you'll end up actually removing glaze and it'll be splotchy. So I'm gonna keep working here. I'm going to now slightly overlap my previous layer. Again, I can feather that out. So find yourself a good pace. Notice I'm not scrubbing. I'm not brushing this super fast. I'm being very deliberate, and I'm trying to get as much glaze off my brush and on here as efficiently as possible. That way I'm not getting any unnecessary streaks. Also notice when I'm dipping my brush, I'm not wiping like you're maybe used to from painting. If you've painted before with acrylic paints, for instance, you've been taught to get the excess off the brush so you're not dripping. I want this as fully loaded as possible. All right, so my second coat is done. I'm gonna just really quickly, lightly, without really any glaze on here, glide my brush over to make sure I don't have any thick spots. Now, my third coat, you can see here that, move this down a little bit, I've actually got some texture going on here. So I'm going to need to kind of force the glaze in here as I go, so I'm not missing any spots. And really take your time and look every angle over so you're 100% sure that you've got every bare piece of bisqueware. So we've got another application coat here. And just brushing this on. I'm trying to kind of be intentional with the direction that I'm taking my brush strokes after I start working my way up the wall. So I'm doing some vertical pulls here. And again, the inside of this is gonna be, when I get to the coil parts, the exposed coil parts, are gonna be a little bit trickier. So I'm actually gonna skip over that and we're gonna jump back to the outside so that we can move on to the next step, which is our next coat, coat number 2. All right, so check this out. You should see a difference in the sheen. The outside, and I'm picking this up, but I really don't like to handle this a whole lot when it's at this stage, because again, the more I'm touching this, the more likely I'm gonna get splotches when it is glaze fired. But you can see there are some kind of still wet spots. It's shiny, it's a little bit darker in color. You'll see that it is dry once everything is this lighter, almost like a pastel version of the reddish brown. So I'm ready to do my next coat. I'm going to flip this upside down again because I just feel like it's more comfortable for me that way. And then also you can see I missed some spots, so I'll catch those when I work my way down. Now my second coat, I'm gonna switch directions. And let me first show you an example. If you notice this green vase that I had in the background, notice the splotches. You can see each brush stroke that this student took. So it's very obvious that they were brushing in left to right or horizontally. Here's one of the reasons why we want to switch the direction. So if I now go, if this student were to, after the first coat, do the second coat with vertical strokes, right? So pulling this way, those would be less noticeable. It would blend. It would be nice and flat instead of splotchy. Another thing to notice, and I can actually feel it's thicker here, but you can see it's darker in that area. There's a higher concentration of glaze. So when the student had a loaded brush of glaze and first went to apply it, you can see it was here and then it thinned out. They did not go back and lightly feather that out to make it as consistent as possible. So this is an example of working too quickly, only applying one layer, right? That's why you can see the raw clay showing through. Now, the inside was poured, so you can see that actually looks a lot different. That's a nicer glaze. That's the way the glaze should look. When pouring, you only have to do it once because it is a thicker application. All right, so I'm gonna be brushing this on here. Again, I'm avoiding this area. If you get a little bit of glaze here at the spot where it's our cutoff area, it's okay. You can take a sponge once you're all done and wipe that free, but you'll never get the glaze totally off. Especially reds, they'll stain the clay. So again, noticing, I'm not moving too quick, but I'm not moving too slow. I'm using the full width of my brush, pulling that through, and then I'm just doing kind of one additional pass over it to make sure I don't have any thick areas and I'm not missing anything. And then I'm being really careful when I get to this spot right here because that's where I initially started and I want to blend that out. Again, we're using this term feathering. It's a painting term where you're just blending in. Most of the time it's that paint into another color, or you want it to fade out. All right, so that looks pretty good. I'll do a second coat here, and then I'm gonna flip and do my second coat on the inside. Then I'll come back after this is dried, which this will take a lot longer. The second coat takes about twice as long to dry. Again, I'll know it's dry once it is no longer shiny and it's lighter in color. You can see the difference here. This is dry from the first coat, this is the second coat. If you are impatient and you decide, well, I'm just gonna put that third coat on here really quick and then I'll be done, you'll end up pulling and lifting some of this glaze that you've applied back off. You're reactivating it because it's not totally dry. So really take your time. You can use a fan or a hairdryer if you want to speed things up, but in general, I'd rather just let it air dry. So 3 total coats. Now, if you do get glaze up here, all you need to do is take one of these little sponges, apply some water, and you can wipe those areas clean. Now, there are a couple things that you'll want to be sure that you do when cleaning up. We've got your brush. We're gonna walk over to the sinks and I'll show you how to wash these out. All right, so you have your brush that we've been using for glazing. What you do not want to do is walk directly to the sink, turn the water on, and start rinsing this out. Because what's happening is you're getting splashes along the sink, and it might be kind of hard to see from the video, but the sink is getting some residual glaze that settles, you can see over here. Rather than do that, we're gonna wipe this with a paper towel first. Now the other consideration is that you don't want any unnecessary chemicals going down back into our water supply, right? Because glazes are chemically based. So I wipe the excess off now. I'm going to hold this a little bit closer to the drain so I don't get this crazy splash. And then I'm using my hands, and also I take the brush in the palm of my hand and get the glaze out. It's the same way that I clean when I'm painting. Get the paint out of the brush, and I'm being really careful about getting it out of the ferrule if any got up into that spot. And then notice I do a little squeezing of this, and if the water comes out clear, then I know it's clean. All right, so last step, reshape these bristles, because if you put it away and it's looking like this, it's gonna dry like this. Like, poor brush has bedhead. He's had a rough night. Take care of your brushes. So I'm gonna re-wet this and re-shape these bristles so that it's in better shape. Return my brush to the appropriate container. And then that is it for glazing.